We are so excited to have as our guest today the one and only Carol Newsom. Dr. Carol Newsom is the Charles Howard Candler Professor Emerita of Old Testament at Emory's Candler School of Theology, where she taught for over 30 years. And she's also served as president of the Society of Biblical Literature in 2011.
Dr. Newsom's work has made such an impact in the field, and to me personally. Her research focuses on the Dead Sea Scrolls and wisdom traditions. She explores questions of identity and personhood within ancient Israelite and Second Temple Jewish communities. She co-edited the Women's Bible Commentary, which I use in my classes, and you do as well. That volume alone is in its third edition. So that alone tells you what an important volume that's been. Her recent book, The Spirit Within Me, explores the development of the self and the concept of agency in ancient Israelite anthropology.
So we hope you enjoy this conversation with Carol Newsom. Thank you for listening to Bible Divas.
Welcome to Bible Divas, a podcast from Baptist News Global, where four women Bible scholars bring curiosity, expertise, and a healthy dose of sass to conversations about Scripture. Whether you're certain, skeptical, deconstructing, reconstructing, or just curious, pull up a chair. The Bible Divas challenge assumptions, explore new perspectives, share a few laughs, and discover why this ancient book still matters today.
Well, welcome, Carol. We're so happy to have you and excited to have you on Bible Divas podcast. And one of the first questions that we want to ask all of our guests is, what got you into biblical studies? What inspired you? A little bit of a background story would be great if you don't mind.
Sure. I grew up in a church family and also as an avid reader. And as a kid, I loved Bible stories, had all these Bible story books, but I also read mythology, Greek and Roman mythology, Norse mythology. And I must admit, as a kid, I sometimes had a little trouble remembering which characters were in which corpus. And but I read for the pleasure of the stories, the adventures, the characters. Loved the book of Judges. Absolutely loved all the action in there and the strong female characters. But it didn't occur to me that there was a profession in that. It's just something you did for fun. So in my sophomore year, when I took my Intro to the Old Testament course, my instructor one day was doing a lecture on the Middle Bronze Age in the ancient Near East. And it was sort of chariots and all these interesting things. And it dawned on me, they pay him to do this. So that was the moment at which I realized you could do this. But I took a detour. I thought, that's too ivory tower. I should go to law school. I should do something useful in the world and, be an activist or something. But I realized I hated law school. I did not have the personality of an activist. And I realized you can't will yourself into a vocation. You really are called to do something. And in my case, it was biblical studies. So I just, my husband was very supportive. While I was still in law school, he gave me the 2 paperbacks of Pritchard's Ancient Near Eastern Texts and Pictures.
Wow. 2 things that every biblical scholar should have in their library.
Yes. So that's how I ended up here.
Wow.
I love that.
I love that too. So what drew you then, if I could follow up with that, what drew you then to work in the areas that you decided to work in?
Well, I started out, the more ancient, the more I was fascinated with it. And when I took Akkadian, I thought, oh, Lord, I want to be an Assyriologist. And then I thought, and how many jobs are there in Assyriology? So I thought, well, I will just study all of the most ancient parts of the Bible. And then somehow I was introduced to the book of Enoch, because the study of the pseudepigrapha had just been nowhere for generations, and it was just being reinvestigated. And so I did a paper on Enoch, and I thought, this is even wilder and more cool than the ancient Near East. So I ended up doing several courses on Second Temple Judaism, including one on the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I just thought there is so much just exciting, fun stuff here to investigate.
Wow.
I love that you shifted to Enoch, because I think for a lot of our modern readers who attempt to read apocalyptic literature, that's a road that's difficult to navigate. So when you talk to modern readers about reading Enoch or other apocalyptic literature, how do you advise people to navigate some of those challenges?
Yeah, it's very strange stuff. And it depends on where someone's coming from. If they're coming from a very, traditional, canonical church or synagogue background, then some of this can be alarming because it's ancient, but it's not part of our canon. Although I will point out, the Book of Enoch is canonical in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. So
That part, yes.
Yes.
let's correct our prejudices here about what's in and what's not in the Bible. Um, but I think for people to understand that the ancient Jews were writing and reading this literature alongside of what we know as the Bible, and that early Christian writers cited these as very important pieces of literature, religious literature, and even considered them to have their own authority. So I think that helps people get over the alienness of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you mentioned that ancient Israel, the ancient Jews were reading the apocalyptic right alongside with their other texts as well. And so when I think about your work and your publications, and please state your recent book as well, you explore the concept of identity and agency in ancient Israel. So what significant insights have you gained from this research as ancient Israel has been compiling these texts and reading these texts together? How did ancient Israel communities understand the self and agency? And how did these understandings affect their literature as they're reading all these texts?
I'm always interested in catching an idea or a concept in the process of change. And so I was working on Dead Sea Scrolls, and particularly first person prayer texts. And I was looking at the Psalms, because people always say, well, they're similar in some respects to the Psalms and different. And one of the things that struck me was that the way they were voiced, the first person singular I, which you do get in the Psalms frequently, it felt different to me. And so I was trying to figure out, what are the ways in which people have started talking about themselves and voicing themselves in a way that's different from earlier centuries. And I started using the term introspective, but people were a little nervous about that because we have our own recent traditions of what introspective means. And the first century prayer texts from Qumran were not that. But so I said, okay, where do I find in the text, because I'm very much an exegete, so where do I find in the text evidence for changes in the way people were talking about themselves? And one of the things I noted was that there is a change in the way body language gets used. So the body parts, ancient Israelites could talk about the heart, their eyes, their hands, and whatnot. But it all seemed to be very unified. This is another way of talking about me. In some of the Second Temple poetic texts, the inner body parts seem to have a certain degree of independence or even alienness about them. They also, and so they would talk about themselves in a more objectified fashion, the I and the me, and some tension between the I and the me. And that's one of the minor forms of introspection. So I started looking for more language and the language about spirit. Very interesting changes take place because they begin to use the language of God placing a spirit within me, which allows a new kind of knowledge and a new kind of knowledge about the self and a kind of shocked horror at the self as it was before God gave that knowledge. And so all of these different ways of talking build on earlier things, but they create a very different experience of the self. Wow. And so we'll never be able to get back to what it felt like to be a Second Temple Jew, but we can get some indication that their ways of thinking about themselves were changing. So that's fun to go. It's kind of like an archaeological dig in the language.
Well, I love that.
Right up your alley, Cynthia.
Wow. Wow. So that's so fascinating.
Can I just make one interjection?
Yeah.
I love how you called yourself an exegete. And but it's interesting because a lot of language in church like particularly in Black church, people are using the phrase, I exegete my community, or, how you exegete the scriptures. And I'm always telling people, exegete is not a verb. You are the exegete. The person is the exegete. So thank you for just confirming what I've been saying for a number of years now.
Wow, that's great. Well, one of the things that I was really excited to talk to you about, Carol, is you co-edited the Women's Bible Commentary. And I use that book in my Women and Gender of the Hebrew Bible class. It's one of the required texts. And so every other year, I get to introduce students to that wonderful volume. And so I'm just wondering if maybe you can tell us a little bit about, why was this volume important to do, especially looking at the books of the Hebrew Bible and from the New Testament, from the perspective of women.
Yeah.
This book was not my idea at the beginning. The editor, Cynthia Thompson from Fortress, contacted me, from Westminster John Knox, contacted me, and she said, I think that a book like this needs to exist. And I said, well, I know nothing about that. I work in the Dead Sea Scrolls. What do I know? And she said, well, would you mind just writing up from your experience in teaching, just write me a memo about how you might use a book like that. Well, she knew what she was doing. So over the weekend, as I was writing about how I might use such a book in my teaching, I thought, oh man, this sounds like a wonderful project. I hope she'll let me take part in it.
So funny.
She had a similar conversation with Sharon Riggy, and the two of us agreed to attempt to be the editors for this. And this was back in the 1980s. And so we scrambled to assemble enough women scholars to fill out all of the articles. And of course, it was, as an experimental project, it was largely North American. And at that time, it was largely white, although Renita Weems did write for the volume. And but we knew we didn't expect it to last very long. We thought, well, this will be superseded in 5 years, and there'll be other things that come along. But it wasn't.
Right.
But one of the interesting challenges in doing it was, yes, some of the books of the Bible were very easy because they had great female characters and whatnot. But I ended up with the book of Job. And although it has one marvelously memorable female character, pretty lines at the end, um, but I had to think, how are you going to raise feminist issues in a book that largely doesn't feature women? So that easy entree is not there. And I thought, well, I need to look at the kinds of issues that feminists have been raising and see how they intersect with what you find in the book. And so, just to take one example, the whole question of whether personal experience is a valid source of knowledge. And of course, that's one of the issues between Job and his friends. And that was a way of saying, look, the issues that women are raising are also a wonderful way of understanding the dynamics of this book and vice versa. So that was a challenge that many of us had in trying to find the right entree. So
That makes sense.
The book, it quickly became what we would call, it quickly became dated in many ways. First of all, it was very Protestant. We had used the Protestant canon, whereas so many wonderful books are in the Apocrypha, the Deuterocanonical books. So the next edition, we expanded the scope of the Women's Bible Commentary. And we also were able to diversify the authors more. And then in the most recent edition, we really made an attempt to broaden the number of people from various backgrounds and ethnicities and locations. And the feminist scholarship had matured so much. So there was much more intersectionality, the use of post-colonial theory, and it's just a much richer volume in many respects.
Oh, that's wonderful.
But the hand belongs to someone else.
But to be in the forefront of that kind of commentary, which I also use in my own classes as well, is just so exciting. And as you think about over the years, how you've gone from first to even more editions, what has that collaborative work looked like? Because you've talked about what expansion into other identities looks like. And now I'm thinking even more womanist and Latinx feminist and Asian American feminist identities. And you've even brought in post-colonial work. And now we're thinking two-third world feminists as well. What do you hope that we as women biblical scholars carry into the future as we do more collaborative work? Because I think about that volume as collaborative work. So I think it's a two-part question. What did that collaborative work look like for you over those years working with that volume? And what do you hope we carry into the future as women biblical scholars?
I wish we had had the opportunity for it to be more collaborative because of expenses and what was then limitations of technology. People more or less worked on their own. And that was, we, the editors, got to see patterns going back and forth, but the individual authors seldom got the opportunity to work in a deeply collaborative way. What I would love to see in the future is assigning two authors to a single book and having the authors come from very different positionalities, and then to write, to share with each other, and then to jointly have, if you will, at the end, a kind of a conversation about their work and experience. So something like that. And I think now with technologies, you could even think of it not just as a print volume, but as something that included video chats and other kinds of online resources that complement the printed word. So I think the future is open, but again, it needs younger people than me to pull that off.
Well, you mentioned that when your editor first approached you about it, that she just asked for a memo about how you might use this in your own teaching. How would you, or how did you use it in your own teaching?
Well, I think we did use it as a supplementary volume to whatever textbooks were being used, because the standard textbooks so often ignored that dimension of the biblical text. It's also, I know, used it sometimes in church contexts with groups of women in particular. And I must admit, they sometimes found it far too cautious. You know, you find some of the most radical people would be the women in churches when they gather together to read the Bible. So, and I think I myself do not have this experience of using it, but it has been used in some women's prison contexts as well.
Wow. Yeah, it is always when people come to me and ask me about what kind of books would I recommend for starting looking at feminist, womanist type of interpretations of the text, and I go, well, this is the place to start. If you're new to this is the place to start. So I hope there's many more additions to that. So hopefully our listeners will also go out and find it. And maybe we could provide them a link for that as well. But so I think, one of my other questions for you is getting into the Dead Sea Scrolls a bit, because you assisted in compiling the official Hebrew edition of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I would love to hear a little bit more about, you talked about how you were a student and you got into looking into some of this, but what a rich experience that must have been to be part of that team. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, I was in the right place at the right time.
Wow.
It made me the first woman editor of previously unpublished Dead Sea Scrolls. Two of my faculty members, this was at Harvard in the Near Eastern Languages program, two of the faculty were Frank Cross and John Strugnell, and they had been members of the original team assembled in the 1950s to publish the Dead Sea Scrolls. Well, the way things happened when their grant monies ran out and they all went off to take teaching positions, they took with them the responsibility for large numbers of unpublished scrolls. This was probably a mistake in administration because there was no way they were going to have the time to complete those tasks. And so they sat unpublished for decades, and people rightly very upset at the slow pace of publication. But being human beings, they did not really want to give up their rights to these scrolls. So John Strugnell asked me to publish one set of scrolls for my dissertation. And this was the first time that model had been tried. And it was not well received by some of the other senior scholars who felt that he should have entrusted those scrolls to an experienced, established scholar. But I must admit, they were all very fair and very approving when they evaluated my work. So I appreciated that, because they could have acted otherwise. So yes, and so I went into John Strugnell with an idea for a dissertation. And he said, well, that's all very nice, but I don't think you can do that topic on Second Temple opposition to the Jerusalem temple until the Songs of the Sabbath Sacrifice have been published. And so I was just crushed. There went my idea. And then he paused and he said, so why don't you do that for your dissertation? And he pulled out a sheaf of photographs and handed them to me. And I looked at them and I thought, gee, I wonder if there's enough for a dissertation here. Ha ha.
Right.
It just shows how little I knew. So it was literally a gift. And in many respects, it established me because it was a work that if I did a decent job of it, everyone was going to take notice.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it was an extraordinary, generous gift. And the other thing I would say about that was that he was very non-possessive about it. And at one point, we were going over some of my work, and he said, Miss Newsom, I don't agree with you on this point, but it's your dissertation. And so even though he thought I was wrong, he did not insist that I change my mind.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Do you think that's common in our field? Um, I'm sorry.
You have thoughts.
I have thoughts.
Well, think of the dynamics. He was an older, famous scholar. I was just a dissertator. He was a man. I was a young woman. So all the power dynamics could have led to him saying, I will not let you publish that because you're
Right.
wrong.
Right.
But instead, it was great respect.
Oh, that's so cool.
And he helped me to see myself as someone with legitimate opinions. So his manner was as much of a gift as the access to the scrolls.
Wow.
So, as a female scholar at that time, dissertating, I can only imagine what kind of impact that had on you as a young scholar to have this established male professor who had that power and prestige but could have used that in a very different way. But the kind of impact that would have made on you as a young female scholar.
No, they were, he was not the only one. I was very fortunate to have established male scholars who were keen to see me succeed. And they put opportunities in front of me. In fact, probably sometimes they were ill-advised, and I got myself into more work than was probably good for me at that time. And but they were definitely they were my supporters and my helpers, and it is something that I know was not the experience for many women.
But I love that. I love hearing the stories of excellent experiences because we don't get that often enough.
Yeah.
So that's good to hear. I want to do one other question though about Dead Sea Scroll research and Second Temple research, and how do you think it's important for our understanding of both the Old Testament and the Bible as a whole? So now I'm even thinking about New Testament studies.
Oh, yes. I mean, it's really transformed how we understand the process of how the Bible as we know it came to be. One of the remarkable things is because our Bibles are typically bound between two covers, we think it's obvious what's in and what's out. Now, Jews and Christians have different canons, Protestants and Catholics, but we all have that volume. But in antiquity, of course, with scrolls, how do you know what's in, what's out? And so we realized it's just not obvious. And there wasn't that idea of a canon until much later than we typically think. And the content of the biblical scrolls oftentimes differs. Sometimes in small ways. There's a paragraph in Samuel that was omitted from the Masoretic text, but shows up in one of the scrolls texts, and it's very clear that it belongs. The most remarkable one, I mean, we can see that there was a process of continuous editing and rewriting, and so it wasn't just in the way early First Temple period that this was happening. It was happening for many, many centuries. And so that raises different questions about how you think about authority.
Yeah.
There's we tend to think of the Bible as, a sacrosanct text that can't be changed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there are Pentateuchal texts that have big sections about how to construct the temple, which are not found in the Masoretic text.
Mm.
And even the scholars debated for the longest time, was this not a canonical Pentateuch text? Now they've decided, yeah, it is. But it was a very late addition, which did not spread to other Pentateuchal texts. So that means that the people who were Second Temple Jews had a very fluid Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I think is very challenging for us. The other thing that has been pointed out is that John Barton is responsible for this insight. And he said, it's not necessarily the case that what we now think of as the canonical books were the most authoritative ones. He says, because if you look in the end of Fourth Ezra, when in this apocryphal writing, Ezra, all the books of the Bible have been lost. And Ezra, in a mystical experience, receives and writes down all of the books of the Torah again, but also 70 books for the wise among you. And Barton pointed out, he said, in one sense, we've got it reversed. The books that we think of as canonical are the ones for everybody to read. The ones that are special are the ones that are not in the canon, that are restricted only to the wise. So he said, it loosens up our way of thinking about how people in antiquity understood sacred writings and how it may be different from the ways we've become accustomed to. So that's one way. But the New Testament, obviously, the scrolls showed some very interesting similarities with some of the New Testament writings, the dualism in the opening of the book of John, Gospel of John. But more recently, there's been interest in seeing how Paul's thought, in many respects, needs to be seen not just in relationship to Greco-Roman culture. It's a big move to read Paul in relationship to the Stoics, but he's engaged with what we call Second Temple wisdom text.
Yeah.
And so now he's being read in relationship to not only texts from Qumran, but other texts from Second Temple wisdom.
Yeah.
So I think it's opening up new ways of looking at the New Testament as well.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think about Paul as thinking in a both and manner. It's difficult to think about Paul thinking in just one way. That's really helpful.
Well, that brings up a question I have for you, Carol. So as far as like Dead Sea Scroll scholarship or even wisdom literature, where do you think, or what do you see as kind of new avenues for those, strands of research? You mentioned Dead Sea Scrolls and Paul, but do you see any other kind of avenues of research being done, or foresee avenues of research being done in both wisdom and apocalyptic?
Yes. And I would point out particularly the work of Annette Yoshiko Reed. She, among others, has been very interested in looking at the scribal, and we could almost say scientific culture that underlies both wisdom and apocalyptic texts. And in fact, whether one should separate the more speculative wisdom from apocalyptic is, I think, a very important question. They have interesting overlaps. And there is a quest for knowledge, transcendent knowledge, in both of these bodies of literature that was shared throughout Hellenistic culture. And that's, I think, a reframing of these texts. Uh, in
That's good.
particular, I think the earliest, what we think of as apocalyptic literature, that some of the earlier texts, including the Enoch texts, um,
Hmm.
they have a mathematical and a calendrical imagination.
Hmm.
They are interested in order, in numbers, in the ways in which time is structured in mathematical ways. And what they seem to be yearning for is a way of comprehending all of the cosmos in a in an aesthetic regularity that is also has spiritual dimensions.
Mm.
So in the Qumran community, the calendar is 364 days long because that is evenly divisible by 7. And so your holy days come around on the same day of the month every time. And so there's a search for beauty and for knowledge that I
Mm.
think is at the heart of both this developing wisdom, speculative wisdom, and
Hmm.
in apocalyptic literature.
Oh, fascinating.
That is fascinating. I would have never thought about that. Wow.
Again, we read back through the way the parts of apocalyptic that Christianity got interested in, which
Hmm.
was more of the historical apocalypses that tried
Right.
to understand um, events in history unfolding in a pattern. But even that is an attempt to, in the books of Enoch, when Enoch sees the future is revealed to him all the way up to the eschaton, but it's an attempt to give unity to the messiness of history and to
Mm.
show that it is orderly in the same way that the stars are orderly,
Hmm.
time is orderly, our worship life becomes orderly because it is matched to these. So I tend to think of them as looking for the unified field theory of existence. And so it is a kind of scientific inquiry.
Wow.
Wow. That's really wonderful. I mean, my mind is just going. I will be sitting with wisdom and apocalyptic research for a
Well,
while.
they actually, and it really was a kind of philosophical inquiry.
Hmm.
Some of the texts in from Qumran, not necessarily from the sect, but
Hmm.
elsewhere, they speak of the Raz Nithye, the mystery of, and then it's a nifal of the verb to be.
Mm.
So it's
Oh,
the
okay.
mystery of existence,
Stream of
and
existence.
that's what they're interested in.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it becomes something which does unify the heavens and the earth, the angels and the humans, the mind of God, and what is revealed to the minds of humans.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I find that part of it very spiritually moving.
Yes, definitely. Well, this has been such a rich conversation, Dr. Newsom. As we begin to come to a close, we really want to ask you, what are you working on currently? Do you have any recent publications that you like to highlight? What are some of your final words to our listeners as they sit in awe of wisdom and apocalyptic literature as I'm sitting here in awe of these conversations?
Well, I have just finished a with the in partnership with Eileen Scholler from Canada, a commentary on the Hodayot, the Thanksgiving Psalms from Qumran, and it will be out next month in July. So
Wonderful.
Oh.
just in time for
Yay.
my birthday, I think.
And what publisher is that with?
Pardon?
What publisher is that with?
Oxford University Press.
Okay,
It's in a series called the Oxford Commentaries on the Dead Sea Scrolls.
great. Great.
Wonderful.
Well, we just appreciate you and your scholarship so much and all that you have done for other female scholars and, male scholars, but on the all of us, but just the groundbreaking work that you have done and just know that it's appreciated and highly valued.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
And it's just been a pleasure to watch the field expand so much and so many new voices take part in our conversational biblical studies.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Newsom. We really appreciate you being in conversation with us. Thank you to our listeners to Bible Divas. We thank you for tuning into this rich conversation, and we look forward to you joining us for our next episode. We will talk to you soon.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series called Bible Divas. Be sure to follow B&G daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. B&G is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.